Well, today's the 29th of December. We've got 2 days to go before we kiss this year goodbye. And in this festive season, please be reminded that you need to stay safe as you drive. Do not overspeed. I don't know where you think it is that you need to get to in record time, but you'd want to get there safe and sound, right? And not in a coffin. So see to it that you drive safely. Of course, things would be even better if our roads weren't so bad. There'd be less of a chance of accidents, but sadly, we find ourselves where our roads are just not doing us any favors. Which is why it's interesting that the Minister of Works and Transport, General Edward Katumba Wamala, has said that the solution to Kampala's city public transport problem is what? What did he say? Is mass transportation. Mass transportation. So in other words, like how in other countries you will see subways and trams and buses and things of that nature. Here, it's still very much the 14-seater taxis and the bodas and other cars. So I don't know what you think about that. Because, to maintain a system of public transportation that is advanced and sophisticated, it requires not just resources, requires manpower, of which I think we lack all. So what chance do we have? I feel like we're just going to have to languish in the current state that we're in.
Mass transportation is actually a good thing. I don't know if you ever sat in the Pioneer buses.
Nope.
Those buses were very comfortable. At least I sat in them when they had just come on board. They were very comfortable and they could take in so many people. So maybe what the minister is saying is that when you have like many of those on the road vis-a-vis many taxis, you are solving the problem of traffic. Are you though? Because I believe that it starts with the road network.
In a way, it's making it worse, don't you think? Because now, in addition to the taxis, now we've got the big buses.
Maybe his suggestion, and in hindsight, what he could be saying is that probably we should start looking at a future where instead of taxis, we have buses.
Well, the reason why taxis came into existence and still thrive is because it's trying to meet a need. For public transportation, which is currently not being met by the state. So private individuals just imported their little vans, minivans, and turned them into commuter taxis. And so that is what people use. Them and borders, of course.
Actually, the transport sector in Uganda is largely driven by the private sector. It's people, individuals, they buy the taxis, they put them on the road, people buy borders, get boys to ride them, or the boys themselves buy the borders. So the government is not really in charge of our transport, because even the train that would have made things easier works sometimes, doesn't work most times, and of course it cannot carry all of us around the city.
Now, I wonder why no one has ever brought up the elephant in the room. That is the class divisions that we have in this society. Even though you had, like, let's say, a public transportation system like those buses, there's a reason I never rode those buses. Because I guess a part of me felt like I wasn't comfortable being in a cramped space.
And they would be cramped. But the few times I used them, they weren't. I would use them in the middle of the day, but if you dare use them in the morning and in the evening, they're too cramped.
I'm trying my best to not sound elitist, but perhaps it's inevitable. What I mean is the kind of people for whom this kind of public transportation would be appealing are probably going to be like sort of lower income people, right? Now, unfortunately, when you have a country that is this poor, our lower income people
the majority
are going to, first of all, there will be the majority, and also they will be like desperately poor. And these are people who are going to not have the best hygiene and so forth, right? Because if you go to let's say the UK,
yes,
a low income UK person
is the elite Ugandan,
do you know what I mean?
down
or
here.
a low income South Korean is not gonna be. He or she may have little money in his or her pocket or handbag, but they'll at least be clean. They'll be presentable.
Fatboy, you're comparing us to people whose minimum wage is 14 or 11 pounds an hour. Definitely, we are
and this
not
is
the
why.
same.
And this is why, like, I also used to hate riding the trains in India. Same reason. And I think India is kind of comparable, given how poor their poor are actually.
And they are very congested.
Right. So you'd sit in the train, and you would feel like. like hygiene was a big issue.
I know what you're saying. I've had that experience when
Yeah.
I was traveling from Kabale to Kampala, and in the bus where I was, a lady came and sat next to me, and I cannot get this memory out of my mind, even if it happened over 10 years ago. This lady was dirty. She was carrying a child, and the child was also dirty. And we had to go through 6 or 7 hours of travel from Kabale to Kampala. Imagine me looking the other side all through the journey, because it's not because we are being petty, but sometimes your neighbor looks a certain way, and even if you want to try and be nice, you're like, okay.
So this, I mean, I know it does sound bad and it does sound elitist, but when you live in a third world country, I think you can truly appreciate it. But you know, like perhaps people who are listening or watching us like from developed countries, they're gonna think we're just being stuck up. Like you have no idea. We've ridden the train. I've ridden the subway in London and in Tokyo. And other places, and it's just not the same.
But
man.
to be the devil's advocate, Fatboy, I also know many quote-unquote elites that ride in these taxis. For instance, I'll tell you, the kind of crowd you're going to find in taxis plowing routes like Ntinda, Chira, is not the kind of crowd you're going to find plowing routes, let's say, Kawala, Waise. But even among those, of course, there are people who, like you and I, the difference is that they haven't yet gotten the money to buy a car. So I'm sure you can sit in a taxi and sit to a reasonable person next to you.
What do you mean a reasonable person? That sounds like you're very dehumanizing.
No, I'm not dehumanizing. Sorry, my bad. I'm just saying that not everyone that uses this our transport system or the means of transport like taxis is that poor. Some of them just don't have enough to have a car or have parked their cars, but they're not people that you wouldn't want to sit next to.
Well, I guess my point is, unless that issue is addressed, you're going to find that those who own vehicles, who own cars, the middle class people that drive the cars, are going to be very reluctant to abandon them. So it'll be a long time before you have a situation like in maybe Denmark where the prime minister takes the train to go to work. I think our system of public transportation just makes it so that those of that economic class, socioeconomic class, middle class, upper middle class, and beyond are going to be less likely to choose public transportation.
But you see, how many are they? What is their ratio? What is their ratio to that of the people that are poor? You'll find that the other ones outnumber them.
Yes, that is true. But then,
so these guys can continue with their private cars, and then the others can use the buses. I feel like if we had more buses than taxis, we actually could solve our traffic issue partly, not entirely.
Well, I never rode on any of those buses. I don't know. It just seemed like being packed in a can, like sardines.
No, if we have many, then we don't need to cramp them.
Because at least with the like the matatus, everyone is sitting.
But the matatus, everyone
so
is
that
sitting,
at least
but
if you could find yourself a good seat, chances are you'd probably just have to deal with the person sitting next to you. Whereas with
in a bus, some people are
standing. In a bus, there's going to be people standing, people sitting, there's people leaning over. It's just mayhem.
But you see, okay, I hear you on that, and I feel like sometimes they are overcramped, yet they don't need to be. But even in the taxis, haven't you ever heard of taxis that pack more than 14 people? You're supposed to be 3 on a seat, but you end up sitting 5 on one seat and on another. And then it falls or overturns. And of course, police will say it was overloaded and then it was overspeeding. So I don't know. But we need to start somewhere. And maybe mass transportation is a starting point.
Okay, of course, it can take many forms. Right now, we're big on the buses. But perhaps... if our city planners were more serious, we'd be designing subways and monorails. Do you know, I was watching a documentary about Germany in the 1930s. As you know, like I enjoyed that historical stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, in the city of Berlin, you had monorails. Monorails are like trains, but that are sort of suspended in the air. Like they utilize a railway track system that is above the ground. Have you seen a monorail?
Yes,
so it's like it just sort of is going up in you're just watching it up there as it traverses the city. And I'm like, wait, this is 1932?
1932?
What? And this is we are now in 2023, going into 2023,
And we are still working on potholes.
Almost 90 years later, or is it 100? And we still don't have anything resembling that. It's so sad, really.
And we don't even see anything close to that, because even the SGR we were supposed to have, the one like Kenya has, that makes people helps people travel from Nairobi to Mombasa. It was supposed to somehow connect with Uganda, and that has never materialized.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Oh, well, politics, a lot of explanations from our leaders, and who knows, maybe money was eaten.
Probably.